to financialexpress.com. Today I have with me Bharat Salhotra, Managing Director India and South Asia for Alstom, and he's going to tell us more about how he sees Indian Railways evolving in the coming years, what should be the focus areas, and what they are getting right as of now. If you had to suggest one big strategy to Indian Railways to make money, what would it be?
What railways really need to do is to become more market oriented,
Right.
more customer oriented. Today, as we have seen, it is traditionally an old organization, inward looking,
Right.
where the mantra is to the customers is you buy what we sell.
Right.
That needs to be transformed into we will provide the services and the quality of service with the right reliability and the right availability to you as you want it.
Right.
And then we will price it appropriately.
Right.
So first thing is a much more customer focused organization, and that must be the first element of the strategy. The question is, how do we reach there? Now, to reach there, we have to first understand what are the key elements that go into defining a service. The customer is just not looking at speed alone.
Right.
He's looking at a lot of other elements.
Right.
And then let's realize and recognize that the railway's bread and butter comes not from passenger, it comes from freight.
Yes.
Then what are we doing about freight?
Right.
It is an important element to be considered.
Right.
So on the freight side, one of the first things that we have to look at is first to be able to map all the customers. There is not one single customer. There are a series of customers with different who face different type of requirements, whose expectations are different. So if you look at bulk carriers, bulk commodity people, like when you talk about bulk commodities, I mean the coal and the iron ore and the steel. They carry traffic or they book traffic by the train loads. Then you look at the white goods. That's a totally different market. So the first step is to making a customer-centric organization is to first to segment the market and then to see what are the expectations and the requirements for each of these segments.
Right.
So for example, what is the level of reliability that is expected? Now, the level of reliability varies from customer to customer. Availability of rolling stock, transit times, speeds, pricing, the speed at which you are able to resolve the claims, for example, claims release settlement process. So there are a number of these parameters which go into defining what is the right service.
Right.
And that needs to be defined for each of the customer segments.
Right.
And then do a competitor analysis to see how does the competition, which means essentially the road in this case, which is a very significant element, how do they compare? Right. What is the pricing strategy of the road space? How does that compare with the rail space? Then are we able to provide the end-to-end services, which typically most customers today are looking at? So which means that for the railways to move away from transport, bare bones transport point from origin as defined by a station to destination as defined by a station, as against that moving towards door-to-door service. So moving away from bare bones transportation, which is pretty much commoditized today, to a logistics approach, to looking at the entire end-to-end door-to-door type of a service, which would then involve setting up multimodal terminals, railways to be involved as a logistics player rather than a player as a simple plain a rail transport player.
Right.
So these are the areas in which you need to look at. So first area of focus is the customer, looking at the customer, segmenting the market, and then developing solutions which are tuned to that particular segment.
And
that's
within customers also, you're saying that freight is a more important area of focus.
I would say both are important, but freight, because freight today is the breadwinner for Indian Railways, and therefore, and let's recognize the fact that today logistics is a very significant part of the total cost that any company undertakes.
Right.
If you look at the global level for India, logistics contributes or accounts for almost 14% of the GDP. In a country like India, whereas typically for the developed world it is somewhere in the vicinity of 4 to 6%, which means that we are spending far more on logistics, on flow of goods across this huge country, and therefore in order to be competitive, for businesses to be competitive, for businesses to be able to compete with the rest of the world, we have to reduce our logistics cost.
Right.
and whether it's white goods or it's export of bulk commodities or even transacting business within the country, the focus has to be on cutting down of the logistics cost. And there, when we talk about logistics, we're talking about freight essentially.
Right.
When we talk of passenger, there are again multiple segments. There is one segment which is very sensitive to value of time. So if I have to go from Delhi to Chandigarh, for example, I have two options. Either I can fly, or I can go by road, or I can go by train. Then I have to, for me, time is very critical as someone who's from the business. Whereas when you compare it as someone who's traveling for tourism, the requirements are totally different. And there again, so just as in freight, it's important to segment, in the same way we need to segment on the passenger side and define what are the 4-5 parameters. How does railways compares with the personal individual cars, or with the airlines, or with the road, and then do a juxtapose and do a assessment, and then be able to design a solution which is then acceptable to the customer.
Right.
So that's step one. So the first step to actually for the railways to make money, if that is the intent, is to understand the market and understand the customer.
So it helps to be more market oriented.
So it has to be more outside in than inside out.
Right.
You know, it has to become more market oriented than a simple pure production oriented organization.
So with all these dedicated...
And for that to happen, then it means that it has to have the right structures in place. The organization structure must follow the strategy that is put in place.
Right.
If you have a customer oriented strategy, you have to have the organization structure to be able to handle.
So what are the bottlenecks in that structure right now?
So today, for example, and I think the Honorable Minister has taken certain initiative on simplifying the structure, making it a little bit more market oriented. There is a strong push for accounting reforms,
right,
where the attempt is to change the accounting reforms in a manner that you are able to distinguish and allocate costs based on line of business. For example, freight or passenger or others. So there is, and also the shift is towards more commercial accrual accounting type basis. So that is one initiative. Then there are certain organization changes which have been initiated by the Honorable Minister. One of which is, of course, is a way to bridge for several decades. In fact, Indian Railways had multiple individual departments which were kind of, while pretty much optimized, among each of those verticals, but overall it was suboptimal structure. There was no horizontal. So I think there are multiple initiatives which are being taken by the current government. The third one relates to decentralization, and that's again some good steps have been undertaken. So all that. Then it's clear that the Railways has committed to invest about 8.4 lakh crores over the next 5 years, which is again a step in the right direction. Again, on the same lines as we are discussing. Because one of the constraints that the Railways has had to face is in terms of the expansion of the existing network. Right. Also, the level of modernization that exists. Some of the services that are being offered are today sitting on old, outdated technology that needs to be upgraded. So, expansion of the network, upgradation of the network, upgradation of the rolling stock, increasing the speeds, for example, all these are different elements. Building the right terminals. There is a strong push on passenger terminals, on strengthening and making them more customer friendly, in a manner of speaking. There's a strong push towards building multimodal terminals with the DFC coming in place. So all these are individual elements of strategy, but we need to recognize that Railways is such a huge organization. It's a 1.4 to 1.5 million employees, carrying almost one full Australia a day, touching practically every single person out of the 1.25 billion people who exist in this country. And to bring about the transformation is going to take some time. So,
agreed. I mean, there are limited resources that Railways has. There are multiple focus areas. So while it is also about speed when you compare it with the road transportation or aviation, there is also a safety aspect. There is new infrastructure versus modernization of existing infrastructure.
Correct.
Then there is also freight. Within that, you have your dedicated freight corridors that are coming out. There are freight policies.
Correct.
Do you think they are moving in the right direction?
I would say yes. then one can say that it would be nice to move a little faster. So the
Right.
direction is good, but the pace of change needs to pick up a little bit, and that would, I think, that will definitely help us. But again, let's recognize the fact that the organization has been steeped in performing in a certain way, and therefore to dramatically suddenly make that change could also be disastrous.
Right.
So we have to move incrementally, moving in the right direction, and I think I'm beginning to see some very initial green shoots which are emerging. I'm today far more confident of the railways turning around, maybe not in the next 1 year, but over a period of time, we will definitely see some improvement on the lines that we've just discussed.
So Alstom is looking to contribute to faster movement of freight in the coming years.
Yeah.
You already have your manufacturing facility in Bihar, and there is this proposal to roll out new, better powered engines that are going to help railways move trains at a faster speed. So tell us more about them. How are they going to transform freight movement for India?
Yeah, so 2 points I'd like to highlight here. First of all, as we are talking today, we don't have a fully completed factory. The factory is
Right.
still under construction.
Right.
And we will be rolling out the first high-powered, high-horsepower locomotive, 12,000 horsepower to be precise, sometime in the early part of 2018, in the
Right.
first few months. Now, when we talk about speeds on the railways is complex because
Right.
it depends on the rail-wheel interaction. It depends on so many elements. Horsepower is just one of those elements.
Right.
The number of trains, if you take a particular segment or a section of the Indian Railways network, the speed, average speed on the network is determined by a number of factors.
Right.
What are the other trains which are running? What is the priority of those trains?
Right.
What is the horsepower of those trains? What is the speed differential that exists between
Yes.
trains? What are the interstation distances? And so on and so forth. And all those elements are, in a sense, being addressed by a combination of two elements. One is the dedicated freight corridor, where you see interstation distances ranging from 40 kilometers to 60 kilometers, which means that the locomotive and the trains can actually gather speed, catch up a certain speed before they have to apply the brakes, which is not the case in the current network. In the current network, if you're traveling anywhere on the Indian Railways network, you will find that there are stations which are appearing every 6 to 8 kilometers.
Right.
And therefore, before the freight train is able to gather its acceleration pace, it has to stop, or it has to stop for various reasons, either for a passenger train to overtake,
Right.
or because it has a lower priority as compared to some other freight trains. So there are various elements to that. So the dedicated freight corridor with its longer sections, number one, with double, it's going to be essentially, but as the name suggests, it's a dedicated to freight. So we have a clear segregation of passenger versus freight, which means that trains can actually run at a much higher pace because there is no train to be overtaken. There are no other passenger trains. So almost all the trains are on a continuous run, let's say from one end of the corridor to the other end of the corridor. The fact that a significant part of the current freight traffic on the existing corridor, Delhi to Mumbai, Delhi to Calcutta, will then shift to the dedicated freight corridor, will enable an increase in the average speeds, both on the passenger and on the freight.
Yeah.
So by bringing in these high horsepower locomotives, deployed on the dedicated freight corridor, for example, we not only end up increasing the average speed of the freight trains, which is today in the 30s to 50 to 60 kilometers per hour, but we also but the strategy would also enable the average speeds on the passenger network to go up, because all the freight trains will move out and the passengers train can run
So
without
it
any.
decongests the
It
entire
decongests.
network.
Yeah, it's simply to take maybe a very naive example, but you look at the Indian roads, look at Delhi, for example. Now, if you bring a Ferrari on the Delhi roads, it's not going to help much,
Of course.
because you have a number of other slow-moving vehicles which are moving on the.
Definitely.
By segregating the freight and the passenger, you are able to significantly improve the speeds, average speeds on both. And also capacity, because capacity is eaten away once you have speed differentials between the trains. You end up eating a lot of capacity.
Right.
So by splitting, by having more uniform average speeds, and let's recognize that the average speeds on freight are quite different from the average speeds on passenger.
Passenger, right.
And by separating the two, we are able to achieve much better speeds on both the networks.
Right.
Yeah.
But what is the global standard for average speed of freight movement?
So
Are we really going to come up
again,
to a certain level with the dedicated freight corridor and your high power?
I would say it couldn't get better than that, because the dedicated freight corridor is essentially a greenfield project. Even though it is most of the dedicated freight corridor would run along the existing network. But it is greenfield in the sense that the project interstation distances are much more. Number one, we're putting the right horsepower locomotives, 12,000 horsepower locomotives on the eastern DFC, and probably maybe 9,000 horsepower on the western DFC, as and when it happens. The trains would all be pretty much running on the same speed. So it doesn't get better than this. So I think we should be able to adhere to reach the global standards.
So we'll be
speed.
able to compare our network internationally once the dedicated freight corridor
Absolutely,
starts functioning.
absolutely. So of course, one point to be recognized is that out of the 65,000 kilometers of network that today Indian Railways has, about 28,000 is electrified and the rest is non-electrified.
Right.
There is a strong push, and this is again credit to the current government, where they have initiated a project for electrification of about 3,500 or 4,000 kilometers of track, of the current diesel track will be electrified. And that will improve the fluidity in the system, meaning that today when a train moves from point A to point B, it can be hauled by electric locomotive right across. It doesn't have to look for a diesel locomotive somewhere in a territory, goes into a territory which is not electrified. And so the flow of traffic, the fluidity in the system will substantially improve.
Right.
These locomotives are predominantly meant for the DFC, for the dedicated freight corridor, but it doesn't stop them. I mean, in terms of the moving dimensions and everything, it doesn't prevent them from being deployed in other portions of the network. And also, let's not forget the fact that the government has started with two corridors, the eastern dedicated freight corridor and the western one. But it's just the beginning, because the plan is to build another 4 to complete the golden quadrilateral, which accounts for over 50% of the traffic, but is actually just 18 to 20% of the total network. So a significant part of the traffic actually moves on the golden quadrilateral. And once this entire golden quadrilateral, aggregating to about 9,000 route kilometers, gets a dedicated freight corridor, I think it will transform not just the scenario on the Indian Railways, it will transform the entire business scenario in the country, because it will be so transformational, and the contribution, the multiplier effect that we will see on the country's GDP will be amazing.
How is this electric locomotive acquisition different from what has happened in the past for Indian Railways?
A key difference with this project is that we are not only expected and required to supply the locomotives, we are also expected to maintain the locomotives and commit to a certain reliability standards.
Right.
So for example, there is a certain limit on how many failures are acceptable to the customer, in this case Indian Railways. In case we are not able to adhere to those reliability indices, there is a strict penalty which is enforced on us. So here is different from the past, because it also starts to focus on outcomes rather than on inputs, and that's a distinct difference from all the other key elements. So both on the maintenance side, inclusion of maintenance, secondly focusing on outcomes, third thing working in partnership, fourth, most importantly, the customer, by focusing on the output, has given us the freedom to come up with our own design.
Right.
It's not like a typical normal procurement process where all design approvals for each subsystem have to be taken by, for example, research design and standards organization, which is the internal
RDSO,
standard, which is RDSO. So in this particular case, we were required to submit a design to Indian Railways, to RDSO, to share our design, and RDSO has the right to give their comments on it, but it's not an approval process.
Right.
And I think so. The fact that the focus is more on reliability, on outcomes, and the fact that with that we have been given the freedom to design has helped us to bring in new technology, new ways of doing things, which may be a little bit different from what has been done in the past. And therefore the focus is more on getting to the end result, which is high quality locomotives, well maintained locomotives, adhering to the right reliability and quality standards, which is which is different from what has been done in the past. If you look at the ABB locomotives, how they were procured in the past, or you look at even the LHP coaches, the focus was more on just acquisition,
Right.
and not on giving an outcome.
Right.
So that's a key distinction in comparison to the earlier locomotives.
So would you say that this has contributed greatly to the way ease of doing business for a company like Alstom is in the railways sector?
I would say so, because it is complex for companies like us to go through the very detailed and it's a very micro-driven process of getting the approvals from our DSO.
Right.
In this case, we had the freedom to do our own design. And of course, if we don't do the right design, then we don't do the right manufacturing, then we suffer with the failures and we get penalized for it.
Right.
So, in this particular contract, Indian Railways handed over the cudgels to us and says, I trust you with your design. You are a world-class player. I trust you with the design. I trust you with the maintenance. But you have to demonstrate it on the ground. You have to deliver in the end, make sure that you deliver me the right horsepower locomotives with the right reliability, availability standards. And we have signed on a deal where we are committed to doing that, to meeting that contractual obligation.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
But this is specific to this particular contract. Do you think overall ease of doing business has improved greatly under the new government? What are the focus areas for them if it comes to increasingly, and that is something that the railway minister has himself said, that he wants the private sector to increasingly participate in the growth of railways, and with the corporatization of Indian railways and all of that in focus, what should Indian railways do to make sure that private firms are able to come on board, are able to do business with better ease than in the past?
Yeah. No, so exactly as I said, the focus, if Indian Railways takes a focus on the outcomes, number one. Number two, changes its procurement process so that it procures not a bolt from, maybe I'm getting a little exaggerated, but typically Indian Railways would buy a bolt from one player and a nut from another player. And say, now when I buy a bolt, make sure that it fits with the nut from buying from another player. In this particular, in the Madhepura initiative, it has gone for the complete locomotive.
Right.
So the focus is procurement of a full system.
Right.
And I think that is a big quantum jump.
Right.
It simplifies work for us. It allows us to bring the right technology to make sure that, because we have the right to do each of the subsystems. In the past, the procurement has been, transformer coming from one supplier, for example, on the propulsion side of a locomotive. The transformer comes from one player, the traction converter is tendered separately, the auxiliary converter is tendered separately, the motors are tendered separately, and each one is expected to work with everybody else.
Right.
And that complicates the procurement process. And in the end, the customer also suffers because he has 4 different players who are supplying 4 different subsystems, and that complicates.
Even if one thing goes wrong, then you're wondering who to go to.
Exactly.
The responsibility lies with 4 different.
Exactly. In this case, the buck stops here. The buck stops with us. So this is a major transformation that has happened, and I'm happy that the Railways is considering adopting a similar approach, for projects like Kachrapara, which are hopefully in the offing, where the Indian Railways plans to procure 5,000 EMU cars, EMU and mainline electrical multiple units for catering to their requirement over the next 10 to 12 years. And I believe it would be structured on similar lines. So I think the Railways is taking the right steps to move away from an input-driven component by component procurement to an output delivery based on overall